Welcome to another Ember Weekend. I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson.
Hey, John, what are we going to talk about today?
I think we have some house cleaning to do first. One of the things I wanted to make everyone aware of is that we created an Ember Weekend Twitter account that you can follow. We're going to be using this hopefully to reach out to our listeners and get some suggestions on content that is relevant to those people. So if you follow Ember Weekend, all one word, maybe just tweet at us and let us know what you think of the podcast and things that you want to talk about. That would be really helpful for us.
Yeah, and some feedback too. I mean, we'd like to know what people like that we have covered.
Well, I know for a fact that they like the stinger, the little wah thing. I've heard this from many people.
Yeah, and the outtakes apparently.
Oh yeah, outtakes are good. This is probably going to end up being an outtake. And so I think we're also going to use the Ember Weekend Twitter account for possible sticker giveaways whenever we get stickers made for the Ember Weekend logo. I'm pretty excited about that. So we always like to talk a little bit about the website, and we're kind of dog fooding the Ember Weekend website, just trying out new things. It's providing some interesting challenges. I've never had to implement an audio player before, so the most recent feature we want to add is the ability to kind of drag a handle to a given point on the track and release, and then have that track begin playing there. So people want to be able to seek around freely without using the seek to buttons that we've been including. And I don't know, it's been kind of interesting. At first, it was simple. It was just some mouse up, mouse down, and then mouse move, and we just update all the values and trigger the audio player API to move to that position. And that's worked great, but there's some issues. One is the MP3s are not immediately streaming. So rather than just being this fluid experience, you kind of go to the spot and it buffers for a second and then it releases. So I don't know, you and I have been working on this for a little while now, and one of the ideas that we have is to disassociate the movement of the handle from the actual progress of the player, and then when you release, we sync them up.
Right. So, yeah, and that's kind of a little different from the way most players work, but probably the easiest one to implement, where you basically the user can drag around wherever, and then once they release, we basically just call seek to, just like the links do. Right. But, which
seems cool. I like the idea of having it be much more responsive. Once the track is loaded, though, you can move it around right now, and it's like, super responsive, and you hear the little fast forward sounds as it's actively trying to seek. But it just seemed like a kind of a clunky user experience. So I know that's kind of a work in progress, but it's pretty cool.
And I think next we're going to talk about routable components, an RFC first submitted by Edward Faulkner, who brought us Liquid Fire.
So routable components. Tell me about routable components.
So the idea of routable components is actually a really large idea. It's not a small change. People who are looking out for these kind of things have heard, well, this is where we're going to remove controllers.
Right.
But there's actually like 4 large parts of this RFC, and it's actually outlined in the scope of this document. So if you look at that, we'll put up a link in the show notes.
Right, and this RFC was released in February, I want to say. So there's been a lot of time to digest and kind of think about this and iron out some of the concepts.
Yeah, and most people seem to like it. Like I think the very first comments were people saying, I ran into this exact case and I thought maybe this would be a good choice, and I'm glad somebody mentioned it and brought up the RFC.
Right.
So we just decided to read kind of in depth, like what the changes are going to be and where the use cases would be. And so there's 4 major changes. The first is that obviously it removes controllers, and components take the place of controllers.
Right. But this still renders into an outlet, though, right? That's kind of like the one thing that I'm thinking of is the URL still gets searched. Or the router still looks at the URL to find out what component to render into the outlet.
Right. For one type of component, for the routable component.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then they have these other components that are asynchronous components. And those are ones that are basically, they don't have an outlet. They're loaded. So it's kind of weird. Like we're still kind of looking into this, but it seems as if the router is responsible for like a set of models that all resolve to some, or have some promise that returns. So there's like a new hook also, that this is the second part. There's a new hook added to the router or to the route that is the attributes hook. And it returns a hash of all the different types of models that your components would use. And then all of those are basically resolved by RSVP hash. And then the result of this hash is actually passed into another callback. It's called render components, I think.
Right.
And those have already been resolved at this point. So it seems like there's the behavior of the router is being extended to account for the fact that there's no controller now, and the components are being split into kind of two different types of components. Actually, more than that, because the last part of the for of this is that components are now being treated as two different things in the sense that there's a true component and then there's a fragment.
Right. And this has to do with DOM elements being created or not, right?
Right. Like I've run across a few times, especially with, I think with Liquid Fire, where I wanted a component to manage kind of a section of the DOM, but I didn't want it to render an actual element.
Right.
So I believe this is what the fragments take care of. And also components they refer to as elements, and then fragments are another type of component called fragments. So
right. Yeah, and that's kind of to disambiguate the two things, right? Because it's
right.
like if you just call them components and then component fragments or something like that, it may not be clear that there's this very subtle difference.
Right, and that they're distinct between routable components, asynchronous components, and now fragments and elements.
Right. It seems kind of complicated, but as we were diving into it, it kind of made a lot more sense. And you're kind of gonna have to transition some mental models of how you approach some Ember stuff, but it seems like you're actually gonna have to think about less in order to get things working.
Right, and we talked about how we were trying to come up with a situation where we had to have this, and almost never was it like a must where you had to do this or it wasn't possible. Actually, we couldn't think of any cases. But
except for the example he gave in the RFC, which was
even the file tree, you could do that manually. You could always yeah, and that was the thing. You could always go do it, but that's the problem is that everyone has to manually just they have to come up with their own convention and their own way to do it. And this is just a way to kind of get everybody on the same page and say, here's the canonical way to do the thing you're wanting to do.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I'm excited about it. I think this is on the 2.0 roadmap. Is that true?
It seems like it. There is a flag on this RFC, though, that it needs a champion and needs an implementer. So I don't know if they've already decided who's working on this or how much work has been done on it. So if anybody has any interest in this, I would go look at the RFC. We'll put the link to it in the show notes, and maybe you can help.
Be a champion.
Yeah.
I like that tag, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great way of like making it seem like it's not work.
So this week was Ember.js. And I was really excited about Ember.js. Obviously, we talked about it briefly after our trip to Atlanta, where we talked to some other meetup organizers. But we were able to actually kind of execute it. I think it went pretty well. So the format that we went with, and this is I want this to be kind of a discussion. So reach out to us, tweet at us about your thoughts on how meetup should work. But the format we're doing is we're trying to kind of step away from the standards, have a speaker, talk for 30 minutes, or eat some pizza and go home. And instead, do a very brief introduction to a problem and then, break for about 20 or 30 minutes while everyone gets to try to attempt to solve those problems, and then come back and then actually solve, have a pre-done solution that we can actually walk through. So in this case, we did a blog. So there's a GitHub repo called Bloggity on the Ember.js organization, and that's what we were using. And we only covered very, very small sections of like functionality in a blog. So it's just like an article show and articles index. But we have intentions on making that work for edit and new and some more cruddy actions. I don't know. It's pretty cool. So we stubbed out the back end and made it to where you're able to test drive this on your own. I don't know. Like you were there. So what do you think about all this?
It was good. I really thought that in the beginning that there was too little content. Even though we were targeting beginners, in my head I was like, well, we're only going to cover indexing, like pre-existing data. What about new? What about edit? What about delete? And then it turned out that it was exactly the right amount of work. I mean, we basically hit our mark of time. So it surprised me. Sometimes with some experience, you forget what it's like to be a beginner.
Right.
The next thing we're going to talk about is Ember CLI Mirage. And
again,
we've covered this multiple times, probably because it's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I started using this in a sort of work project. And it's just to kind of stub out a back end that I kind of wished existed. So I could kind of verify that the Ember work that I'd like to do on this project would indeed move at the rate that I want to move at. I love the way you can define the routes, but it was very verbose. I was like repeating a ton of setup code because it was a JSON API, not a JSON API in the strict sense, but like I was having to parse JSON from the response, and so I was doing a lot of stuff, and I started refactoring it out and saying, well, I'm always repeating this. Let me move this out, and I started coming up with a kind of a simple API structure that let me have a more robust test backend to do things like validations. And then what I ended up doing was pulling in Ember validations, and that worked great. So now I have this validations folder inside of my Mirage that lets me have something like an email validation, or like, this field can't be empty, just as if you would validate your Ember CLI model or your Ember models.
How are you defining the validations? Do you have like an object that does these validations? And then how do you actually plug that into Mirage so that it knows?
So right now what it's doing is it's pulling, you actually have to explicitly pass the validations out, but where I'm storing them is inside of, so Mirage is stored in app Mirage. And so I'm just storing this in app Mirage. I think it's validators. And then I have a validator for each model type. So in my case, I have a user, then I'll have just user.js in there. And so what it'll do is when you're like posting to user to create a user, it will look at the validator user. And it'll say, well, you can post a user, but it has to pass these validations.
Right.
So the more I looked at it, the more I realized that I wanted a strict JSON API as defined by jasonapi.org. So the next work I'm going to do on this is to actually have the posts be forced to use the JSON API format, and then the responses also adhere to the JSON API format. So there's gonna be a little more work involved, but in the end, what I'll be able to do is fully stub out a backend that's JSON API with validations inside of the validations folder.
Ember, so validations as defined by Ember validations.
Yes, exactly. So there's no work. I mean, there's no difference. You don't have to know any new way to do validations.
Right.
You just make a model in this folder that is just the model you want to validate.
That's really neat. Are you thinking about making a PR or a gist to kind of, maybe see if this can be baked in?
I mean, you could do that. You could probably bake all of this in, but it's at least one add-on in itself.
Right.
Like I wouldn't think that most people are going to use JSON API with Mirage, so that would definitely be its own Ember CLI add-on. Mm-hmm. And even the validations part of that would probably be its own add-on. They just need to work together. So it's going to be at least one other add-on that I'm going to probably come up with.
That's cool. So JSON API is the last thing we want to talk about. And when we say that, we're not talking about a JSON API. We're talking about JSON API as defined by jasonapi.org. And I think this is a pretty neat kind of effort that we're seeing. So Ember Data is trying to push towards at least having this be the kind of default standard for dealing with backends. And I think there's also a push for active model serializers to default to JSON API format. So if both of those things happen kind of at the same time, you'll end up being able to kind of get this free, awesome API interaction. And I don't know. So you've been doing a little bit more digging into this with your work on validators. What do you think about this?
The standard is really interesting. It's not. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I've never written an API that would output something like that, and I don't think anybody has. It's really a unique thing that it seems like it's trying to solve every use case possible. Like it does a lot of enterprisey things with basically, I think they call them profiles.
Yeah, like field definitions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could basically handle anything in there.
Types,
it's kind of like a document type definition, I think. But yeah, you can just say, I have metadata that's going to be paging information here. Go get this profile, and it'll tell you how to deal with that. I haven't read much more into that, but I mean, it's very extensible. It seems like, mm-hmm. And everything as far as I've seen is it's designed to kind of solve the issues where you get this, hitting the same route and getting the same data back from 5 different services looks completely different. Like even though they're all JSON. They can be nested in completely different ways. If you have a post and that post has a user and that user has other posts, how do you represent that? You kind of get this cyclic reference. So this kind of defines like a way of saying the data you're getting is, say, user, and there's some included things like last 5 posts or something. You have a very well-defined structure, and that structure is really pretty simple. You have the data, you have the metadata, the included items, and you have links. So the links are very interesting. They're kind of like a hypermedia API. They're saying, here is where you got the information, and here is some related information, or like, the next thing in the series. There's some weirdnesses though. Like I don't think that I've ran across any case where like most of the link stuff would matter, but all the other things, the included.
Yeah, I really like the included. So you specify, if you have any associated records, you specify a linkage, and then the linkage is all the information necessary to go look it up in the included hash, or the included object rather. That's a really cool, convenient way to do it. I think that helps a lot with those dependencies that you're talking about, because at any point in time, it's not going to have to follow and go, sideload things in the conventional way. It'll actually be able to look them up. It'll have a convention for looking them up inside of that included object.
Yeah. And then also the metadata is great for things like paging or anything that you have that's specific to the data set that you're getting.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like it's very well outlined in the actual document. The document is very extensive. I feel like we can spend a lot of time trying to understand it, but and I fully intend to. I suspect that the introduction level kind of like immediately gets some use out of this standard is going to be pretty simple and kind of understandable and relatable. But the more deeply you dig, or the more specific your needs are, then you'll be able to dive more deeply into this document. But reading it all in one go, I feel like is probably not the easiest way. I think it would require a pretty concerted effort. It's a very complicated document, and there are some really smart people on it solving problems that are not necessarily problems that I've encountered. So it's kind of humbling in that way. As I read through this document, I keep on having to try to understand like the motivation behind it, because I know the motivations are to solve these very real problems.
Yeah, and there's still time to contribute and get some of your opinions heard. It's still a very fluid specification, it seems like.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work being done on it. I know Ember Data is shooting for at least a compliant default. It's the Ember.js API that they want that to be kind of ready to go at the 1.0 release and sometime in June for beta release.
Right.
And that's pretty exciting. And I know I see a lot of movement there. And the spec itself is on its way to 1.0, so it's pretty cool. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the day when I don't have to write any JSON parsers or anything. I just kind of
you have like these standards, like you can count on things to behave the way they should.
Yeah, I just write a serializer in Rails, and then I just tell Ember, this is my back end, and then Ember just deals with it, and Rails does its thing, and I don't even have to deal with any of this.
So I think that is going to be it for this Ember Weekend. I'm Jonathan Jackson.
And I'm Chase McCarthy, and we'll talk to you next weekend.
Yeah.